Mental health and wellness are taboo topics in Black communities because of its stigmatizing history. This idea that I don't need to go to therapy or ask for help when I'm going through something because I'm Black and I'm strong enough is really harmful and something I used to think is true. There's a pattern of reluctance in Black families when it comes to seeking health support due to many different things, such as socioeconomic factors and harmful stereotypes and tropes around Black identity. So how do we detach shame from our health experiences and lean on support from others despite the systemic barriers that have been put in place so that my people can thrive? Let's discuss.
My name is Natalie. I am a mental health therapist and registered social worker. I work both in community mental health settings as well as in private practice therapy. My healing journey was intimidating at first. It was very deeply personal. It is very deeply personal, but absolutely worthwhile. I actually avoided going to therapy myself for a really long time. The thought of it was kind of terrifying. I thought that I was going to start this process and it was going to be this Pandora's box of all of these big emotions just pouring out, and I wasn't going to be able to contain it. So it just never felt like the right time to start. So I didn't really start consistently going to therapy until I started working in this field. So when I started my first job doing counseling, I really realized that it was important for me to do my own self-work if I was going to be supporting others in their self-work. I knew pretty early on that I wanted to go into some form of caring profession. It's kind of just my way of being. I've always been somebody that feels comfortable holding space for others, feels comfortable having difficult conversations.
Tell me about wanting to pursue that goal, because I know for me there was a lot of pushback. You know, my uncle, who's been a really huge male figure in my life for as long as I lived, he was really concerned when I said I want to be a psychologist, right? I think the line of just healing and mental wellness work can sometimes be misinterpreted, and because of the shame, because of the stigma.
Yeah, totally. I think I also felt some of that concern from family members and people that were around me when I was making that decision. Just like you're saying, aren't you worried it's going to be too much to take on, that people's problems are going to be overwhelming for you and you're going to be stressed out all the time, and right, all of these kind of judgments about what it means to be working in this profession. There was also a lot of jokes I noticed about, oh, once you're a therapist, I might need your services someday. And that was always a laughing matter, without really addressing head on the fact that, there were family members around me that maybe, did have some pain or some trauma that they needed to work through.
I see that pattern a lot within Black families, and even I do it sometimes, joking about the things that you go through. One, I think it's a coping mechanism that can be healthy or not healthy, depending on how avoidant you are. Why should we start taking this seriously? What is the purpose and the focus of therapy that Black communities should be more aware of, so that they see themselves in therapy but also see the seriousness of it?
There's this belief that the people that are receiving mental health supports, that are on the receiving end, are other than ourselves.
Yes.
Right, are different than ourselves in these very fundamental ways. And that's not true. I think the majority of us, if not all of us, can benefit from some type of support in processing and moving through life challenges. You don't have to be in crisis, which is a common misconception. You don't have to be at a point that you're in total crisis, that you are desperate for the support of a mental health professional.
And also, therapy brings out different things for different people, right? There's different kinds of therapies.
The type of therapy that you're gonna get depends on where you're accessing it, right? So of course, if you're going to a private practice, you're going to be experiencing the style of therapy that therapist does, right? So it might be narrative therapy, it might be cognitive behavioral therapy, emotion-focused therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy. There's so many different kinds and different spaces where you can actually access therapy for free.
What would you say to folks who are living in poverty or are living in situations where there's barriers for them to access therapy? How do you detach that shame?
I always encourage folks to be patient. Because the first thing you try might not feel like the best fit for you. The first therapist you go to might not be the best experience. It doesn't mean that there isn't someone out there that is a great fit. And we're out here, there are many therapists in the city that are that their practices are catered to working with Black women, with BIPOC folks, with queer folks, right? So it's important to kind of be patient with yourself, be patient with the process. You know, a lot of places do offer sliding scale options, which means that even if they have a certain set rate, it's negotiable with your budget, right? So that can be an option. Some people do pay what you can,
which I love.
It can be difficult being the first one, you know, to take that step. You're not just doing it for yourself. You know, when you're entering this conversation with a therapist or whatever it is that you're doing for your well-being, you are also bringing with you, you know, your parents' stories, your mother, your father, your grandparents, your ancestors, right? So there's all of these pieces that are coming into this work with you, which can feel very overwhelming, even if we don't recognize it, right? But it makes it that much more important because this line of pain and of trauma is ending with you, but it's also ensuring that healthier ways of being and thinking and feeling are being passed on to the next generation. And that's really powerful stuff.
I love that, and I think that's so important. I think our healing journeys are nonlinear and are gonna look different for different people, right? Not only us as women, but for men, as for non-binary folk. There are a lot of people who are experiencing this differently, and because of their different identities are gonna walk through this very differently, right? You know, just even thinking about how women feel like vulnerability is a sign of weakness and how men feel like being emotional is a sign of weakness, right? You know, it's about debunking these things and holding space for us to unlearn and also create space for healthier habits, setting up boundaries, and ultimately just choosing ourselves and taking a chance on ourselves. And I think that's what healing's all about. And I'm so glad that more people are starting to normalize, you know, creating healthier habits, but also starting the conversation.
My name is Jay Baker. I am a queer, multiracial educator working on equity and intersectionality in the wellness and mental health space.
How important is vulnerability to you? And were you exposed to vulnerability growing up?
Vulnerability is incredibly important to me. I don't think that healing can happen in the absence of vulnerability. I think that it's a crucial part of seeking out, accepting support, and I think support is absolutely necessary when we're talking about healing. For me, I don't think that I really thought about or knew about or saw vulnerability in my life growing up. When I was growing up, my friends literally called me the robot because I never showed emotion. I never wanted people to see what was going on for me or when I was struggling, and like you, I thought that was a sign of strength, that showing any vulnerability was a sign of weakness. And now I'm seeing that when I don't share, I create this weird cycle for myself where I'm not sharing and then I'm not receiving support. And then I feel that resentment of, you know, why isn't anyone supporting me or reaching out to me? And then I realize, well, okay, what have I actually shared?
Right.
How have I showed up in a space that is authentic to myself, that acknowledges where I'm at right now? And if I'm not doing that, then how can people know that something's going on for me and
100%.
know that I need support?
I think self-advocacy as women, as Black women, is so important. And I had to start realizing that my self-advocacy is a part of my health and a part of like my wellness and my self-care, advocating for yourself and making sure that you speak your truth in its entirety. So I send long paragraphs when I have to. And you know, it's hard because it's just like, it's vulnerable. This idea of Black resiliency and this idea of being, you know, a Black superwoman can be really flattering, it can be impactful, but it can also be really harmful. Can you speak to some of those harmful ways you might have experienced being called resilient, being called a superwoman? What does that look like for you, and how does that make you feel?
So being called superwoman for me used to be a compliment. In some ways, it was an acknowledgement of my strength, of the resilience that I carry with me through my lived experience, and it was an opportunity to be seen as someone strong. Now I think a little bit differently about it. I think the narrative around being a superwoman, especially for Black women, is one that creates a situation in which Black women cannot reach out for support. It creates a false narrative that we don't need support and that we can handle everything on our own. And it also results in a situation where we don't feel comfortable or confident or able to express that vulnerability to reach out for support, because we've created this narrative for ourselves that we've got it all.
Yes.
And so to not be seen that way is to almost lose a part of our identity, because we've grown up thinking, you know, being strong, being resilient is who we are and not necessarily a part of who we are.
You turn to art and other therapeutic methods in order to engage in wellness and healing. And I think it's important for Black folks to know that there's other healing modalities that you could turn to.
Art and creativity was huge in taking care of myself. I acted, I danced, I sang, I rapped, I produced, I stage managed, I did it all. I think a lot of the Black community engages with the arts to tell our stories in some way. Now I rest. That is the biggest thing for me. I think for a lot of my life, I felt that my productivity was my value. And now I realize that I'm really just feeding into this system that really, you know, forces us to feel like we have to earn our rest.
Yeah.
That we don't deserve rest until we've worked our 40 hours plus, that we're taking care of our communities, that we're taking care of our families, and showing up in ways that are really extra. I realize now that rest isn't a privilege, it's a right. Immediately when we talk about self-care, bubble baths come to mind, candles, like a nice warm spot that we can sit down, but that's not what self-care looks like for everybody. That's certainly not what it looks like for me.
You know, a lot of those individualistic practices are helpful, but can also be harmful, because it tells you that when you're going through something, you go through it alone, which is why I try to tell, you know, people in my life that collectivism and community is so important. Like, you can't do everything yourself. We're taught to do that as Black women, as Black people, like, you know, live alone, die alone. You know, you have to be independent, you have to be strong, you gotta always carry yourself in a particular way. But it's okay to depend on support systems. It's okay to collectively heal. I think collective healing is so impactful.
Individual self-reflection, self-work, inner work is so important, and that's one piece. But I think community care, community healing is equally as important and almost has to happen simultaneously. Some of the things that we hear the most are around exercise, eating well, and sleeping well. Yeah. Well, what happens if we can't do those things? What happens if we don't have access to adequate food? What happens if we're working 3 jobs to, you know, make ends meet and we're not sleeping well and we're stressed because we're taking care of our families and our communities? What does that look like? So the healing has to happen at a community level just as much as it's happening on the individual level. For me, community is wellness, you know? Food security is wellness. Having my life, my lived experience reflected in education is wellness. Being able to walk safely in my neighborhood is wellness. And all of those things are a part of community.
Our ancestors have built legacies by navigating survival. In the pursuit of survival, our ancestors have had to sacrifice their health, their happiness, their hopes, and their dreams. In order to break generational curses, we must practice self-preservation. We must practice radical care and unwavering love for ourselves and for each other. We must prioritize our emotional, physical, psychological, and mental health. We cannot be the fires that ignite change when we are already burnt out. Now more than ever, the narrative must be shifted so we are no longer just living to survive, but living to thrive.